Today we're going to hand over to Professor Hift to talk about planning. And if you have a look at, if you just Google planning quotes, there are so many out there that have so much meaning. And everything comes down to the essentials of planning. There's all sorts of planning. Our system tries to get you into planning by first having a concept sheet. That's your initial plan, moving on to a protocol, which is development of that plan. Your protocol should have more detailed planning, etc. So I'm going to hand over to Professor Hift. Again, thank you so much, Richard, for the time that you've taken to prepare this talk. Thank you. Enjoy the talk, everybody.
Right. Thank you, Colleen, and thank you for those of you who are attending. This is, as Colleen has said, in fact, a very, very, very important subject. Both your success in your PhD, as well as your chances of actually completing in the time that you'd like, are critically dependent on these two things, timelines and budgeting. At the same time, it was a little bit hard to put together a presentation on it because it ought to be so self-evident. Sadly, it's one of those things in life where we all, sorry about the video, I think my little camera's fallen off, I'll just switch it off. Like many other things in life, we know we ought to do it, but we're not very good at actually doing it. So let's go straight to a presentation and we'll just chat about this, and I really look forward to some discussion coming from people afterwards. Right, so I'm going to share my screen. There we are. Let's start with timelines. This is what we'd all like our PhDs to look like. We start. Within a few weeks, we've got the concept sheet all finished. In fact, and it would have been preferable even to have it finished before we registered and started. Within 6 months, we've got a protocol. We can spend another few months just setting up, getting all the experimental stuff ready or getting everything ready, whatever it is that we need to do the study. Probably got a good 2 or more years in which to do the study. It may well be more, leaving us quite a lot of time to analyze the data and to write it all up. And as I think I've said before, I often find data and writing up pretty much overlap with each other. I tend to write up while I'm analyzing data, and the two really feed off each other. But there we are. And we successfully submitted the thing, September of our 4th year, and we're all ready to find our names on the graduation list for the year after that. But all too often, 4 years seems a very long time, so we delay at the start. We didn't really get our project finalized, what we wanted to do, until about 6 months. Then it took us another 7 months to get the protocol written. Then we had to wait for the ethics to come back with our protocol permission, during which time we set up for our experiment. And we don't really start getting underway until something like 18 months of our 4-year period has elapsed. And this, sadly, is by no means an uncommon occurrence. Some of you have probably had experience of that. Some of you have probably had experience of worse. That's all assuming that you get your protocol finished completely, but writing a protocol can be extraordinarily difficult. Getting what you want to do in your study actually sorted out, very, very difficult, particularly if you're new to research, particularly if your supervisor is not all that hands-on or is perhaps somewhat junior and inexperienced themselves, particularly if those who review your protocol don't like it and send it back, but they may have delayed in sending it back, and you can find yourself way out there beyond 18 months before your protocol is actually finished and you can set up. So in this case, 2 years have elapsed and you're only actually getting busy with the actual work of the PhD 2 years into it. If we just look at the other end, we find that similar things happen. It often takes far longer to analyze your data than you think. It may not be your fault, apart from actual technical things, like the stuff being complex. You may have to wait for appointments with statisticians. You may have to wait for your supervisor to go through things with you. You may discover errors in your data that make you have to go back and repeat a lot of the data. You may lose it and have to find it. Whatever the excuse is, your data may be very, very delayed. And then obviously your write-up is. And so in this case, the very rapid write-up, you're still not finished by 4 years, and graduation is pushed back further. And that's, of course, not to say that writing up itself is not extremely difficult. In my experience, it really is. So if you're taking a lot of time to write up, a lot of drafts, a lot of editing and toing and froing with your supervisor or a scientific writer, whoever it may be, we may well find ourselves well into the 5th year before we're in any position to submit. Okay, so way down there. And that's even before we talk about what would happen if our study for any reason got prolonged. And of course, there are numerous reasons for studies to be prolonged. Taking longer than we thought to recruit the subjects, equipment that breaks down, tests that aren't available, pandemics that come along, money that runs out, trauma and drama with co-investigators or supervisors, whatever it may be. Numerous things may greatly prolong your study. And now you can imagine you're really being pushed back into the 6th and 7th year. Right. So that's a long list of horror stories of what can go wrong with your project ending up looking like this. So the whole idea of timelines is that we try to set things up realistically and keep to our timelines to try and avoid those outcomes I've been illustrating here, which are very, very common. Now, those of you who are around a number of years back will remember Barack Obama and his inspirational call.
It looks like we've just lost Prof. Heft for a minute. Let's just give him some time to get back.
All right, I think I'm back. Just for a second, I went. Can you hear me? Yes.
We can hear you, yeah.
So a few years ago, yeah, Barack Obama, very inspirational. Yes, you must. I'm sorry, beg your pardon, that really threw me there. Yes, we can. The unfortunate thing with timelines and budgeting is it's not really a thing like yes, we can. It's a case of yes, you must. And it's not necessarily the easiest or the most exciting thing you've ever done. It calls for a lot of discipline and a lot of very realistic thinking. But I think both Colin and I would really urge you, when it comes to timelines and budgeting, yes, you must. If you want to avoid those unhappy outcomes I've been describing, you have to. So let's just talk a little bit about how you do it. Okay. Well, obviously, you'll plan your project properly. Okay. You can't make it up as you go. And in fact, there are quite a number of PhD candidates that do it. They come up with some very vague research question, and then they get stuck into the project, and they sort of assume that that vagueness will sort itself out as things go on. It may not. And I was on one occasion consulted by somebody at the end of their 4th year of their PhD who were busy writing up, but were worried that things—
Sorry, Richard, we can't see your presentation. I think, can you share your screen again, please?
Oh, okay. Sorry, that sudden loss of communication did that. All right. So, as I said, quite a number of people come up with a vague thing and then they hope it'll come right by itself. Well, it doesn't. And I was telling you the story of a person in their 4th year of their project who came to me because they weren't really happy with the way they were proceeding. They said they had produced 3 papers, but when I looked at them, they were quite clearly 3 papers saying the same thing. And to me, that really was 1/3 of a PhD project. So they were far from finished. And yet it was only at the end of the 4th year that they realized that they were in serious problems. Right. So projects have to be planned properly. One of the whole ideas about PhD training is that it's meant to teach you, the absolute rigor of knowing what you want to do and then planning to do it. You've got to fit your project to your time. Have to choose a topic that can be done rather than a topic that would be very nice to do but can't really be done in time. You have to limit your ambitions to what is actually achievable. And a very common experience we find with all young researchers, including masters as well as PhDs, is that the original research plans are to change the world. Find the cure for cancer, a sort of thing, and not the realistic understanding that in science it's given to very few and very infrequently to make a major paradigm leap that changes the world. Einstein, Darwin, people like that. For everybody else in science, it's a case of just moving the field forward, a paper at a time. So very important to have realistic ambitions and realistic insights into your capacity to do the project. Time, finances, the support you need. Just give one example of that. As you know, many of us, unfortunately, particularly at master's level, have to work without much in the way of support from research assistants and so on, because there just isn't that sort of money floating around. But I have come across very talented and gifted students, MEd students, who are already, in fact, specialists and working as consultants, doing a lovely project, but expecting to do all their data collection themselves. So I asked them, how many subjects do you need? They said 100. I said, how many hours will you need with each subject to gather the information? They said 4. So grade 3 arithmetic, multiply 100 by 4, that's 400 hours. Divide that by 8 hours in a day, and that comes to 50 full working days. Absolutely impossible, for a person with a busy life and another job to find 50 full 8-hour days to meet with the research subjects. So, wonderful idea though it was totally unrealistic. And yet she had not done that very, very simple sum, very simple, or division, I suppose it is, multiplication and division before signing on to this project. Now, a good supervisor should really be having these discussions with you. Critical discussions, and discussions that are not once off. They should be repeated as time goes on. Is your project appropriate for you? It may be a good project, but is it appropriate for you? As, for example, a part-time student, holding down an important job. Maybe it's more appropriate for somebody who can devote themselves full-time to that particular project. Really have to have thought through the feasibility for on-time completion. You should really have sought assurances from your supervisor that it really is possible to complete it in the 4 years that you'd like to do it in. That includes, of course, the scope of the project, as we discussed already. Too ambitious a project is not going to be finished, but also the resources available. There's also a tendency to take on research. Some simple sums tell you that you need R1 million to complete it, and you've got 150,000 out of the College Dean of Research, and it's just a sort of hope that the other 850,000 Rand will materialize as the project unfolds. Well, all too often it doesn't, and then you find yourself stuck having analyzed 20 samples when you're actually supposed to be analyzing 150. So watch out for that one as well. Now, obviously, we cannot be dogmatic here about what you must do and what you mustn't do. Every project is different, and every candidate, every PhD student is different. You have professional and work obligations, and they differ from one to another. You have professional and work ambitions, and they differ from one to another. Obligations, I mean, what you have to do at work. Ambitions is what you'd like to do at work. Maybe you're doing a PhD, but if you are also a clinician, well, then you don't want to fall behind all your colleagues in the business of becoming a better clinician or a more experienced clinician or being promoted as a clinician. So now you've got major conflicts there as well. We all know you've got family commitments and you've got financial and other constraints. So very important to understand what you're taking on. And you've probably noticed that we are starting to veer now into the territory that we tend to cover on the Tuesday afternoons, but they really are critical to a reasonable timeline. You have to set up a project that's feasible, but then you have to conduct that project in a way that allows for regular progress at the rate you wish. Okay, we all know that as a researcher, you may well have family commitments, particularly if you're a somewhat older candidate. Okay, we in the health sciences, we have many who are in their 30s and even 40s when they come around to do the PhD. A little more difficult for them, but I have to say they produce wonderful PhDs, and I think it's because of that life experience that they bring to the job. But they're being pulled by children, parents, school, sport, family time, cooking, household, shopping, domestic. And it's no accident, obviously, that I've shown a female scientist there. I'm sure it would be all very politically correct to put a male, but sadly, I think we know that in very few cases do male spouses really take on all of this to free up their female partners to fully devote themselves to the PhD. Sadly, it tends to be very much still the other way around and working in the men's favor. But everybody is pulled in this way, some more than others. As we've mentioned, many of our colleagues in health sciences doing PhDs are simultaneously employed and working. They have a profession which has demands after hours calls, the need to work on Saturdays or even Sundays. Pharmacists may be working in Dischem on Sundays. A huge call on your time. There's also a huge call on your commitment. Okay? As part of your duties, you are required to attend regular clinical meetings, update sessions, administrative sessions, etc., along with your actual clinical or other duties. There's the emotional calls, of your work and professional environment. As I mentioned earlier, there's your personal ambition. One of the things that's been recognized for many years as holding up medically trained people from going into science and into PhDs is their fear that they will fall behind on the clinical, the professional ladder. While they're doing their PhDs, they're doing much less clinical work possibly, and so their colleagues will get more experience and will get promoted ahead of them. And this is a very real issue that has to be confronted. And of course, you've got an employer who may or may not understand these various calls on your time. Then Tuesday afternoon session, stuff very obviously, you've got commitment to yourself. The need to relax, to enjoy life, to have quiet time, to unwind emotionally, and to develop other areas of your life and self, the walking and the hiking and the glass blowing or the macrame or, DIY or whatever it is that you particularly like. And locally, many of our colleagues actually hold academic positions too, and they're required to teach. Even though they're doing a PhD themselves, they may be required to supervise honors and master's projects. There are calls upon them for administration. plenty of calls for what I call do your bit, which is stuff that's not really your duty, but a moral pressure is put on you to agree to take over somebody else's class or to represent the department in a particular forum, etc., etc. And then you've got things like the university's performance management, which is designed as one size fits all and often doesn't really help those who are doing the PhD. Then we've got the whole financial aspect. Okay. Some of our students here today almost certainly are sacrificing income in order to do a PhD. That may also mean that they have to supplement their income. Which means, as I said, working after hours and working on Saturdays and Sundays. And that severely impacts on their ability to maintain progress through the PhD. Okay, the time is limited, and many of them actually have a very serious emotional worries about being a burden to others, no longer fully supporting the family, but relying on a spouse, to do so for them. Right. So this all comes down to the need to arrange your PhD around your life and to rearrange your life around the PhD, concessions and sacrifices. Now, we talk a lot about rearranging your life around the PhD, and I'm sure a lot is said on Tuesday afternoons about that. But I really do want to bring your attention to the first line. You also need to arrange your PhD around your life. You've got to be fully aware of what is possible and what's not possible, and you have to plan your time such that your PhD is possible while still attending to all these other numerous calls on your time and on your emotional space. And one of the most important of these is setting aside protected time. If there's one bit of advice that I feel is most critical for any student, any PhD student who is not full-time, but is called upon to look after patients or to work in the Dis-Chem pharmacy or to teach students or play with the kids at night, whatever it is set aside protected time. And I've proven to myself over and over that 8 uninterrupted hours probably has 20 times the value of 1 hour times 8 in the week. So this means sensible things. The clinicians, I tell them, if you're an HOD, you just announce that you are not available every Thursday or every Wednesday and Thursday afternoon, whatever it is. You're not in the office, or if you are, the phone is off the hook, the door is locked, and they have instructions not to disturb you under any circumstance short of the building actually being on fire. It's absolutely essential. When you get into work, particularly writing, you'll find that it really is a case of getting into the zone. You get into it, you lose all sense of the passing of time. You look out the window, it's become dark, and you absolutely cannot believe that 6, 7, or 8 hours have passed. And you'll find that that is an extraordinary productive time. If you get disturbed every half an hour and every hour, the work just does not actually get done. So that is the most important thing. And I can't tell you how to do it, but even in your family life, you have to try and set aside protected time, but obviously in such a way that it is not perceived as being selfish of other family members. Right. So put yourself in do not disturb mode. What I put here, not just them, they mustn't disturb me, but you yourself have to get in the mode of not disturbing yourself. I will not look at my WhatsApps. I will not look at my emails. I will not answer my phone. While I'm here, let me just finish that other bit of work that I'm meant to do, whatever it is. Got to get into do not disturb mode, which is research time and nothing else. Right. And this brings me to Sackett's 3 rules, which has always made a big impression on me. Sackett, widely regarded as the father of evidence-based medicine, Most interesting character, I read this today. He repeated his residency in medicine 20 years after his first training, even though he was already a professor, because he thought he wasn't a good enough doctor, so he wanted to revise all his training. Okay. He'd also been a research professor at Oxford, and he had this lovely comment. He said, they have 20 ways of saying interesting, all of them negative. In other words, telling your work is interesting in a way that quite clearly communicates very negative connotations. Anyway, this is the paper that Sackett wrote. It goes back to 2001 now, which I've regularly sent out to my clinics, my clinician colleagues, on the determinants of academic success as a clinician scientist. For those of you who are not clinicians, the same principles, I'm quite sure, apply. You just need to see how you can apply them in your own life. This is what Sackett said after a lifetime of being a clinician scientist. The need for mentoring, the need for creating priority lists and updating them, that's why he calls them periodic, and time management. There it says nothing about brilliance, funding, the right training, the right project. It says mentoring, periodic priority lists, and time management. He believed that those are by far the three most important things. Mentoring is not just somebody who gives it good advices, but somebody who might share resources with you. But he makes the point, not obligations. Okay, so somebody who says, yes, use my equipment, or why don't you use my secretarial staff to capture your data? But not somebody who says, please, I need you to go and help me in the clinic, or I need you to teach my students. Opportunities. Why don't you go to this conference, or why don't you review this paper instead of me doing it? Advice and protection against the worst instincts of some of our colleagues, who delight in putting other people down, including students. Then he talked about this priority list. Now, don't worry about the actual sort of numbers and things, but ask yourself, what are you doing that you want to give up? Things that you've been asked to do that you don't want to do. Things that you're not doing that you want to start. Things you want to keep doing. And then the big one, how do you shorten that list of things you'd rather not be doing or shouldn't be doing, and lengthen the list of things that you do want to do or believe you should be doing in order to complete the PhD? And then the time management, I'm going to read that sentence to you, it's so important. The most important element of time management for academic success is setting aside and ruthlessly protecting time that is spent writing for publication. I've encountered several successful academics whose only control over their schedule has been protected writing time. Hence my, in aside Fridays, closing the door, locking it, refusing to answer the phone, call me if the building's on fire, otherwise you leave me alone. Conversely, I've met very few academics who succeeded without protecting their writing time, regardless of how well they controlled the other elements of their schedules. So, food for thought. Okay.
Richard, if you're back, you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. I keep having these little micro lapses in connectivity. Right. As I was saying, thanks for reminding me. Okay, we need to fit the PhD to your time, as well as maximizing the time you have to devote to it, maximizing the efficiency of the time you have to spend to it. Right. Classic example of fitting the PhD to your time. If you're a school teacher, well, try and do a PhD and you're doing your research. Similarly in the health sciences. Rather, do research on the sort of patients that you are looking after clinically anyway. And maybe you should try and change the sort of patients that you look after clinically so that they match those that you're actually studying for your research, setting aside a special clinic for a special disease, whatever it may be. Right. But let's come more rigorously now to the planning. So
I'm sure we're all understanding that there are just some issues. Winele, can I ask you to please switch your video off? Thank you. Let's just wait for Prof. Hift to come back.
Okay, I am back. I apologize for that. That was a rather prolonged outing. Right. Should I carry on?
I think let's try again. I was also just knocked off for a minute. So I think let's carry on and
Right.
be patient. Yeah.
Okay. Something to bear in mind all the time. What I've done is shown a picture of a movie, on Netflix or YouTube, just to remind you that down at the bottom, it not only tells you how much time has passed, it also tells you how much time is left. 41 minutes of this movie gone, 1 hour and 27 minutes left. And that's a very useful analogy, for thinking of your way through your PhD. Not only how many months have gone, but how many months are left for me to do what I need to do. Now, I do find that the PhD by publication, or even if you do a dissertation, if you think of it in terms of papers, actually becomes quite a lot simpler to plan. Setting aside, well, I'd like to have paper 1 completed by such and such a time. It should be able to complete another paper 6 months after that. It should not take more than 9 months for the 3rd paper, and that actually provides a very realistic, sensible timing for the pursuit of your project. So that's actually well worth doing. Now, as Colleen says, there's plenty of stuff on the internet about all of these things. So I just went and picked up some sort of popular websites. This is one of those things on maximizing your productivity, organizing your time. Create a time budget. Prioritize all of your tasks for the day. Keep documents and records organized. Multitask. Be a clock watcher. So I just extended this from the day to the whole PhD project. Prioritize all of your tasks for the month. Okay. Keep documents and records organized. I cannot stress that enough. And that includes not having your references up to date and organized so that you spend hours and hours and hours shuffling through all sorts of things trying to find that reference that you know you read but can't recall what it is when you actually have to add it to your writing. Okay, multitask if possible. We'll talk about that. And rather than be a clock watcher, be a calendar watcher, as we've said. Remain aware at all times. Remain conscious of your rate of progress through the PhD. And if things are not going well, intervene at an early stage. Intervene may, of course, mean seeking outside help for intervention. Then there are some more formal tools that you can use to plan projects, well worth looking up on the internet and using. And in fact, when you apply for funding for certain grants and what have you, some of them these days will actually ask for a formal so-called Gantt chart. We'll come back to this. There's Henry Gantt. It actually turns out that the so-called Gantt charts were devised in the mid-1890s, so they're nothing new. They've been around for 130 years. They're the things that look like this. Okay. On the left is a list of activities. Do your reading, finish your protocol, get ethics permission, learn how to use EndNote, put together your data collection instruments, recruit your patients, whatever it may be. All of those things go on the left, and along the top is a suitable time scale, which for the PhD should be roughly about 4 years, each activity being represented by a bar. So you can see what activities are, when they begin and end, how long you should take on a particular activity, as in protocol to be completed by 6 months. You can see where activities overlap with other activities. That's why I pointed out multitasking earlier. It really is important. It's quite possible to plan to do several things at the same time in a sensible, realistic way. So, for example, your Gantt chart may show you that your protocol is now with the ethics committee. So it's quite feasible now to have an overlap with something else, like whatever it may be. Traveling the country to publicize your study, to encourage other people to contribute to it, whatever it may be. And of course, an ending date for the whole project. Such an example. Okay. And here's one. Colleen was kind enough to send to me earlier. And thank you, Natasha Kitano. I believe it's actually yours. Right. And this is an application for some sort of funding. And again, they are particularly stressing that they want these timelines. They want to know what progress is going to be done, when seminars will be done. Okay, capabilities and tasks, advanced theoretical knowledge and skills, information processing skills. When Natasha wrote, I must develop skills in research software, in other words, in vivo. I must develop understanding of the theoretical framework. I must develop the skills and qualitative exploratory case studies. And she said she needs to get going on that in December of this year. Okay, and by the end of next year, she really must have all of that stuff under her belt. That's what she would like. And it goes on further. Research progress, accessing the literature, consider methodologies, etc., etc. Right, so it's very much a roadmap. You can plan your route, and once you're on it, you can assess whether you're making adequate progress. So once you have a timetable, it's very important to stick to it. It's no good that it's a theoretical thing stuck in a drawer. You do need to know what you need to do. It's got to be placed in the correct sequence. You've got to set realistic time requirements, allowing realistic overlaps. And of course, absolutely, you've got to allow time in reserve. Things always take longer than you expect, right? money runs out, patients don't turn up, your supervisor resigns and goes elsewhere, making you start all over again. You run out of equipment or reagents, all sorts of things can happen. So plan, reserve time. And then you need to be monitoring your progress, rearranging your timeline as necessary, and responding to delays, doing something about delays. Let's just turn to budgets. Right. So again, I mean, this comes from a bank. I just looked it up earlier today. Calculate your net income. Well, I changed that to funding. The foundation of an effective budget is your net income. It's by no means unusual to ask a student what money they have available, and they can't really tell you. They tell you, yes, they've been promised money, but they don't know how much it is. Okay. They may even have received a grant, but they don't know how much it is or how it's broken up or how it may be spent. You cannot plan and budget for your project if you don't fully understand the money that you have available to you. It's also important, perhaps, to have a flexible budget. If my money stays as it is, then I'll recruit 50 subjects. If I am successful in raising another 100,000 Rand, then I will increase that to 100 subjects, or I will add this DNA testing onto the DNA testing that I've already planned, whatever it is. But you have to be absolutely certain that your PhD will succeed even if you remain on the lower budget and don't have that happy experience of receiving the extra money that allows you to expand your project. You need to track your spending, set realistic goals, okay, make plans, adjust your spending to stay on budget, and review your budget regularly. So how accurate is your budget? Well, you've got to have a very accurate knowledge of what income is available to you. And as I've said, students often haven't really bothered to find out. You need to accurately identify all the cost drivers that are to be expected. Okay, accurate estimates of the cost. So you've got to go through all that thinking of every single thing that could possibly cost you money. It's no good having a budget that just sort of scrapes in, and then you discover to your horror that it's going to cost 5,000 Rand every time you send your samples by international courier to the States. And unfortunately, you haven't set aside 50,000 Rand for 10 courier runs to the States. Absolutely useless when you've done everything else, but you can't get the samples to the States for some critical work that needs to be done. So you don't want to find that at the last moment. Then you need accurate estimates of the cost. And I think all of us, or most of us, are actually pretty bad at this because we are lazy. Making accurate estimate of the cost usually requires some hard work. You actually have to inquire or email or make a phone call to find out exactly what a reagent is going to cost, to find out how much they will charge to courier it to you, and so on and so on. Okay, you have to find out from people that are providing some analysis to you, for a cost, exactly what it's going to cost, and make sure there aren't hidden costs, that they're not going to say to you, well, I'm terribly sorry, but it's actually taking twice as long as we thought. So either you must pay us twice as much, or we can only do half the work for you. So this requires hard work to actually find out a realistic estimate of what the cost is. All too often, we just sort of take a guess because it's a whole lot easier than going through all that hard work. You have to allow for overruns, underestimates, inflation, unexpected price increases, the need to expand the study. Maybe after 80 subjects, you find you've got a non-statistical trend, but the statistician tells you you're onto something exciting, and if you could just push your numbers up to 120, he or she is sure you're going to reach a significance. Now you've got to, allow for the fact that you're going to need another 40 subjects. The same sort of thing, this I actually found on a website. This is the Western Australia Department of Health. It's a handout for clinician researchers doing research in their hospitals because they require a budget. Okay, and they break it down like this. Project-specific costs, okay, costs for other departments that support your research, drugs and devices, procedures, investigations and tests, equipment and ICT, travel and transport, licenses, participant payments, record and data management, project-specific reporting like statistical analysis and monitoring, archiving, okay, can be very expensive if you're actually going to store away samples in liquid nitrogen, translation, policies, seminars, publications, okay, etc. So this was the list I made. It's fairly similar. Equipment, test costs, reagents, pharmaceutical size, which of course is got a critical relationship to sample size and the ambition of the study. Transporting samples, storage and refrigeration. It may be necessary to take out insurance if you're doing clinical work. General office administration, paper, and nobody uses post anymore, but paper and printing and telephones and couriering and so on. Wages for research assistants and data. And there again, I find that people are often very reluctant just to get hold of HR and ask them, what is the cost of employment of a part-time research assistant? They make it up only to find that there is nobody out there to work for 30,000 Rand because the laid down university minimum is 80,000 Rand. And data capture. Fees for statisticians, thesis preparation, scientific writers. Can't underestimate publication fees. So many of us have had this problem now. We have a lovely bit of work, a wonderful journal, but it's one of those that charges publication fees, just about nothing in dollars and pounds, but when you multiply into Rand, suddenly you need 6,000 Rand to get your paper published, okay? And for certain types of grant, you yourself may require money out of it. You may be drawing a stipend or a salary from a grant, okay? You may have to do travel as part of your work. All of that has to be in the budget. Here again, this is something that Colleen has sent me. I'm really starting off by stressing what I put in the red box at the bottom. This is an Excel spreadsheet. And can you see how many tabs there are? This particular funder expects you to budget for local conferences, abroad conferences, local study training, international study training, sabbatical travel, visiting scientists, research equipment, domestic travel, human capacity development, and so on and so on. Maybe not entirely applicable to you as PhD students, but the same sort of principles apply. And then absolutely itemized why it has to be done, how much it costs, how many of them you're going to do, how much in year 1, how much in year 2, how much in year 3. And this sort of thing is very much the norm now for 3 or 5 year grants. You have to break it down into this sort of detail. This is an example taken of the web. Obviously, this is tropical medicine people in the UK traveling out to West Africa, to Ghana, to do clinical research. Okay, so they have to budget for transcriber, interpreters, airfare to Ghana, lodging in Ghana, car rental, fuel costs, allowances for a driver, transportation for field assistants, cell phones, modems, hard drives, digital cameras, blah, 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 and so on. Pen drives, refreshments for various people, gifts to chiefs, I like that one, participant honorariums, meeting room rental, and so on and so on. And it's all itemized, and down here it is in US dollars. Okay, and I'm going to stop right there, and I hope that's been of some help, and I look forward to hearing your own comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's a much better talk than I was going to give. I'm very comprehensive as well. And also the philosophy behind planning is so important. I was looking up some quotes on planning, and many of the Second World War politicians were saying that plans mean nothing, but planning is everything. And I see what they mean is The act of planning is an intellectual activity, and plans can change because things do happen. But if you've got a plan in your head, a plan can be tweaked when you come across a boulder in your way. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. Any questions, any comments? And while we're waiting for comments, while I was looking at these, I saw Margaret Thatcher had a quote. I don't know if many of you would know Margaret Thatcher. She was the first woman Prime Minister of the UK. She said, you make a plan and then you act on it. And that's another thing a lot of people do. They're very good at planning and creating lovely Gantt charts, and they look very pretty on the walls, but they don't calendar watch, as Prof. Heft pointed out. Calendar watching, monitoring yourself is very, very important. I'm going to just ask people to comment from the audience then. Tamlin, what is your take-home message from this talk today?
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. I'm at the office.
We can hear you.
I think it's so important to plan, and having those Gantt charts are one thing, but monitoring them regularly is another. I think note taking for me is really important, and writing down lists. And I see how that really fits in with everything that Prof. Heft has spoken about in terms of having a plan, because in research things change constantly. And so you have to constantly update yourself in order to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. So thanks so much for the great talk, Prof. Heft.
Thank you for saying that. Welcome.
Shamila, what is your take-home message? Shamila, are you with us? Oh, we can see you now, Richard. Okay, Shamila might be driving and not able to pick up. Fortunate Sithole, what is your take-home message? What is your comment on planning? And have you been able to plan and stick to plans?
Thank you, Prof. Colleen. Well, the one point that really hit me hard is the aspect of having protected time. That has been my biggest weakness, and I think I really need to consider that because most of the time I dedicate an hour or so and I have so many disturbances, and as a result, all the deadlines I set for myself, they always fail because I don't have that protected time. So thank you very much, Prof. Heft, for that particular aspect. It really hit home very well.
It's absolutely true. I find it myself. If I give myself 2 hours and I switch everything off, I do more work in that 2 hours than I could do in a whole day sometimes. Shamila, are you back with us?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Colleen. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay, thank you. Prof. Heft, this really, really hit home for me, really hard. It's something that, that's really touched, this session has really touched me at a very late stage for me, because I'm one of those who hasn't planned well at all. And I just thought, I'd get my stuff in order as I'm going along. And I didn't really have a planned schedule when I was going out, when I first started. And as a result, it landed me up in really hot waters. But now when you say, Prof. Heft, about guarding your time with everything you have, I totally can relate with that. And yes, it can be only if it's a life and death situation or burning building that you'll come out. I can totally relate with that, because as time goes by, it's so easy to lose a grip on what you expected to do for an hour or a day. And it just mounts up, and before you know it, it becomes this ugly monster that you don't want to tackle. And you think you can put it off and procrastinate, but it just adds more stress, and it just knocks you totally off your plans. It creates a whole lot of stress family-wise, because as you're saying, Prof, there's so many other things that a PhD student goes through besides just the aspect of getting through the degree. There's the home front, there's the work front that you've got to be always abreast with. And so this session has really, really hit home for me. Thank you, Prof. Hift.
Richard, would you like to come back with some comments on what our students have said?
I'm glad they agree with me because I agree with them. It's absolute. It ought to be self-evident, but it isn't. Dropping work and then picking it up a few minutes later just doesn't work. You never actually get up to full speed. Whereas, as I said, if you just lose yourself on your work, you'd be amazed at how productive you are and how quickly the time goes by, particularly when there's any sort of writing involved. Papers, protocols, or even data analysis. You can work through pages of Excel spreadsheets, but if you break your concentration, you forget exactly where you are. You have to start all over again. And that also is when the mistakes come in after that interruption. So thank you, everybody. As I said there in the chat, it comes from the heart, this stuff. I have it from personal experience. And to be honest, maybe Colleen should be giving this talk, because I suspect some of this talk, it's very much a case of do as I say and not do as I do. No paragon or no virtue or example when it comes to this sort of thing.
I think we're all human. And I think of two quotes, because, I'm into quotes at the moment because I was looking for someone planning that are interested, because I saw one about proper planning prevents poor performance. And I was looking for that and I came across these others. But there are two others that come to mind. And the one is just going on what you've just said, Richard. And that's from Jane Austen, which is 200 years ago. She said, I'm not normally in the humor for writing, which means I'm not normally in the mood to write. I have to write to get into the humor. So what she's saying is exactly what we're saying. You're not in the mood to work, but you've got to get to work. And then once you start and you give yourself time, you can get into it. And then it's hard to pull yourself out. You get to have some fun sometimes. I mean, that's the one thing I love about literature reviews is, you think about looking at all this literature and then you get into your collection of literature, and after half an hour, you just can't stop. You know you've got to get to the bathroom or go and get a cup of tea, but you just want to see that next paper. And then there's another quote that kept coming up, and I can't remember if it was Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson, who said, if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And that has a lot in it as well, because it means that if you spend time planning and sticking to your plan, you are actually going to execute the project a lot more efficiently. Elliot, you've got a hand up. Elliot, please unmute.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you so much, Prof. Hift, for such a wonderful presentation. What I can say here is that it is also important to include your family in your planning. They need to know. I think that will also help you in getting their support and their cooperation. Because if they're not involved somehow, if they don't know anything, if they are at a distance, it might be possible to be interrupted. And another thing is, it is also important to identify a place where you feel you become productive when you do your work. So if that is very, very important, where your study behavior occurs. because sometimes it depends. So if you can identify that and then you stick to that, and even time, you must know when it is, which time is suitable for you, where you actually become productive, especially like the early hours of the morning, or from 12, maybe you sleep a little bit and then you wake up and you are fresh, and then ideas will start flowing. It becomes so interesting. So I just want to say thank you so much, Prof. Hift, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank
Perhaps
you,
just two
Elliot.
comments. The first is absolutely to agree with Colleen. It's a strange thing. You can put off getting to grips on that paper or editing a paper. But when you finally get down to it, it actually becomes such an interesting thing to do that you bitterly resent interruptions or having to stop at the end of the day in order to go and do something else. And despite the fact it's such a wonderful thing to do, it wasn't actually easy to pick it up in the morning and get going onto it. Something very strange about the human condition. The other thing, Colleen, I've just looked up that quotation, and I think you've got the right interpretation. No, spend lots of time preparing for the task properly before you actually undertake the task. Funny enough, when I first heard it, though, I read it differently. And perhaps that's just a point too. I thought what he was saying is that if you've got plenty of time, then you faff around for the first 4 hours before you actually get down to doing something useful. Looking at it again, I think you've got the right interpretation. But what I've just described is unfortunately a very real thing too. It's no good setting aside 4 hours in the afternoon to do the work. And in the first hour, you put your papers together. The second hour, you put your pens in a row and sharpen them. The third hour, you make your spreadsheet look pretty, and so on. That's also a very human thing to do. Many years ago, a man called Parkinson came up with a thing called Parkinson's law. And he says that work expands to fill the time given for its completion, such that you're always rushing at the end to get completed, no matter how long you are given to do it. That's largely because of this habit we all have of procrastinating and procrastinating until we can't put it off any longer.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Richard. And like you said, our advice does come from the heart. It comes from years and years of being human, of learning about our foibles, of learning about ways to master our foibles. So I'm sure everybody enjoyed the session. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and we'll see you all again next week at the same time, same place. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof. Bye-bye.